the We Wreck Records podcast. Hi, welcome to We Wreck Records, a podcast by New Noise magazine. I am your host, Christina Rowett. This is my co-host, Chris Enriquez. Welcome.
Thank you.
Today we are celebrating a very special moment in music, the early 90s.
Music was so interesting at that time. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like before like Nirvana happened, like there was also like this kind of bubbling critical mass, you know what I mean, underneath it. And then all of a sudden like this sort of sea change happened with with Nirvana and all this kind of music that was like, you know, like Sonic Youth had a gold record, you know, like music that would have not even been considered at all was all of a sudden being brought out to the public. We could be nostalgic and be psyched about Faster Pussycat or whatever, or, you know, about, Cinderella and appreciate them, you know, for what they were. But like for me at the time, if that represented hard rock, I was not into it.
Sad. It'd be a sad.
Yeah.
We've had several guests feature on our show who made albums in the 92, 93, 94 era. So we're featuring a few moments from each of them. We have Buzz Osborne from Melvins, who came on and did Stoner Witch, which is one of our most popular episodes. We have Walter from Quicksand, amazing post-hardcore classic Slip Was. We've got Billy from Biohazard, who did Urban Discipline in 92, which is one of the forerunners of, the whole rap metal crossover.
Yeah.
And we have the mighty Molly from Bratmobile talking about like Potty Mouth and Riot Grrrl. What's your take on this particular moment in time, Chris?
Yeah, no. In 1993, I was 13. I remember it very well. Grunge was in motion, and you have to figure, right, Nevermind came out in 91. So for someone that's 13 years old and into Nirvana and Pearl Jam, we're sort of like in the thick of it at that point. And now we're starting to get into In Utero, and now Pearl Jam has Verses. That's like the hot stuff, right? And a lot of these post-hardcore bands were hardcore bands. They were coming from hardcore bands like Gorilla Biscuits and Youth of Today, and they basically were influenced by the grunge scene.
So all of a sudden this sort of thing happened where, so I could like sign to a major label and we're going to take some heat from our like fellow people. But with each band that like signs, it gets a little bit less scrutinized, you know what I mean? Because you have more people to point to. Oh, they did it. They did it.
Like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, and it's like they're not shit bands that got signed. You can see the seeds of almost everything that's happening now in music that were kind of in the ground at this moment. This show is proudly presented by DistroKid, and we have a special deal for all the musicians out there looking to release their new music fast. DistroKid helps over 2 million musicians around the world release on all major music streaming platforms and YouTube. You keep 100% of your earnings, can access a huge range of features, and if you like this show, support this show by taking advantage of this incredible offer, 30% off your first year with DistroKid. Just head to distrokid.com/VIP/WeWreckRecords. This show is presented by Grillo's Pickles. Grillo's Pickles make the freshest, crunchiest, most delicious pickles. And even if you're not a pickle fan, you should try Grillo's today. Why not? Live a little. You can find them in the refrigerated section of your local grocery store, so chill out and eat a pickle. This month's episodes of We Wreck Records are brought to you by Earpiece, the high-fidelity earplug brand designed to enhance your experience of live music. Their lightweight, triple-patented design basically conforms to the natural shape of your ear canal, which is awesome. And it's the closest thing to custom-molded without the price tag, or the chronic fear that you're going to lose them. Your future self who wants to listen to live music when you're old will thank you. For 15% off your next pair of earplugs, head to earpiece.com/pages/WWR podcast. We'll put the link in the description. Definitely suss it out. I love the lore of like Kurt Cobain and the Nirvana guys getting introduced to alternative music by Buzz Osborne, took him to his first show. There's like direct through line, but what I do find amusing, because everyone cites the Nirvana thing. I've spoken to everyone from like Baroness to everyone talks about that moment. I mean, it was a huge moment, and it was just doing something that, he's one of the greatest melody writers of our generation. but still had that edge. And because he was like schooled in the right kind of music, then it had that edge that was different. And that edge is missing from modern pop music, I think, like the ability to kind of combine that. But we'll just throw in one little moment from Buzz, who does not agree that Nirvana changed everything. Nirvana, like, breaking really big was kind of the thing that made a lot of these underground bands, like, you know, like, think they could do something at a popular scale. And
I never did.
Yeah.
I never thought that.
That's interesting. You know? What's your take? Yeah.
I was already making a living playing music before Nirvana ever broke.
Yeah, I feel like
I didn't need them. I didn't need them to help me do it. And in actuality, I don't know how much good that has really ever done us. As far as like, oh yeah, push this to this next level. That's total bullshit.
There is a bit of a story from 1993 with Houdini, which was Melvins' major label debut, where they brought in Kurt Cobain as a producer, and this happened. Garth
had worked with us a little bit on the Houdini record, and kind of finished it up after I fired Cobain from that session. That's a funny story in and of itself, because Danny Goldberg insists that I didn't fire him, that he quit. I don't know why, but okay, whatever. He said that we wanted Cobain to write songs for us, and that's why Kurt didn't want to work for us. I was like, I don't need anybody to write songs for me. I've written and recorded literally hundreds and hundreds of songs.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem writing songs. You know, when we worked with Kurt, I thought, what does a producer do?
What does a producer do, Chris? What does a producer do in this crazy time?
Well, if you think about somebody like Steve Albini, for example, rest in peace. Steve Albini did In Utero, but he also did the Pixies, Surferosa. He was really sort of credited for a sound that eventually lent itself to Bush and a lot of bands that were like the post-grunge bands, and people loved that he had a raw outlook on how he would record bands. So there was no studio trickery. Basically, he was setting up microphones and then just documenting the sound of the band playing in the room. He wouldn't even like to be called a producer, right? So, that was a very big sound for 90s bands, was that raw Steve Albini sound, I think, because of his outlook on music. And that was like a counter to that big glam metal thing that we were hearing, which was like, you hear like a band like Rat, and the snare drum sounds like a rocket ship. It doesn't sound like a drumming room. But then you have people like Butch Vig, who has to be mentioned here because he did Nevermind and Siamese Dream, and he did and he worked with so many bands that defined the 90s. And he sort of had like an in-between philosophy where he did like to get a band sounding a certain way that he felt was kind of slick, but not too slick. And his role in all of that really ended up being the sound of the entire sort of generation. I mean, he was obviously in Garbage as well. Yeah. So, we can't forget that. So I think a producer's job is to work with the artist to basically capture a sound and the idea that you might have in your head in the studio, and they have to know how to do that for you, right? So those are some
sometimes take a little nap. Actually, naps is not a known technique for certain producers out there in the world. That
Well, if you're
we're not going to go there, but it's interesting that it's interesting, all the crossover and all the cross-pollination in this stuff, which is like all underground music. This kind of leads pretty naturally into our next guest, which is Biohazard, who did Open Discipline in 1992, one of the first albums to really cross over hip-hop, metal, punk rock. And talking about the media, like the message, I think this was a really, really golden era in terms of hip-hop. Like,
oh yeah.
This was a golden era, and and a time when like scenes are starting to, and that's what Billy will talk about is this kind of dissolving of scenes and dissolving of lines between things and all that sort of thing.
It was a great era, and it was very influential for not just us, but for everyone. It was a time when boundaries were blown away, because before that, when we came up and even before our first record, if you were into hardcore, you didn't go to metal shows. If you were into metal shows, you didn't go, and nobody went to hip hop shows except hip hop heads. So there was so strict boundaries. Nobody fit in. And the thing about Biohazard, I think, when we played with hardcore bands that we looked up to, like Agnostic Front or Cro-Mags, we were too metal, and we weren't hardcore enough. But then when we played with metal bands like Exodus or Slayer, we weren't metal enough. We were too hardcore, and we had too much groove and there was too much bounce. Or not too much bounce, but we didn't resonate with the majority of the crowd. And especially being heavily influenced by hip hop, there was a flow and a subject matter that were similar to the hip hop, what was going on at that time, which in my opinion was some of the greatest moments in hip hop. So we kind of created our own audience of people who felt like they didn't belong in one scene. They had 1 foot in this scene, 1 foot in that scene. Their style, baggy pants and extra large shirts, and not putting, safety pins in your cheek. So like all that stuff, it was like a group of people who felt like they were outsiders and suddenly felt they were part of a scene of peers that liked the same thing. Yeah, and Biohazard, we were the soundtrack for that subculture, sub scene within the scene. And then it just grew. And then the scene changed. And we weren't the catalyst. We weren't the guys. We didn't start something new. We just did what we did in an authentic and real way. And I think that resonated with a lot of people. And suddenly we found ourselves with, talking to people that were like, yo, I love Wu-Tang. I love Onyx. And I just never heard of you guys. But this is awesome. It's got a bounce that's similar. And the things that you sing about. So everybody had their own maybe story about what got them into Biohazard.
Hip hop, obviously, Biohazard did a lot of stuff with Onyx. Onyx, of course, had Slam, was their big hit single. There was even a lot of crossover happening with Cypress Hill and rock bands. And then there was this Judgment Night soundtrack that Biohazard was on with Onyx. And then, Faith No More was on there with Booyah Tribe. And Cypress Hill did something. Even Sonic Youth was on there with somebody. And so I think Faith No More and Rage Against the Machine on like a much larger scale, and of course Public Enemy with Anthrax, as far as the 90s are concerned, they were all finding commonalities. I think these bands were all singing about a mixture of things, like political things, social political things that are happening in the streets. So they realized how much more they had in common. NWA and Public Enemy certainly had a lot in common with a lot of the punk rock bands that were getting popular. And so,
yeah, it's a big deal. And it's really interesting that Biohazard's Urban Discipline and the Rage Against the Machine self-titled album came out 5 days apart. So it was kind of a moment. And I think it's definitely an interesting moment. And it's something that was very artfully done by a few people. Nu metal, I think when anything goes broad, like mass, giant, there's always going to be people who don't quite get it. But I think this particular moment, and as you said, Judgment Night soundtrack's mental, in terms of bringing together, that's a moment. And I love as well, Cypress Hill are the metalheads hip hop group, you know, B Real's a huge Aussie fan and was a metalhead before he was a hip hop guy. So I get it. I've loved and horror is kind of the bastard child of all of this in some ways.
You did mention the tour with Onyx, and they were authentic, they were real. That's what resonated with us and them. We were on tour with Sick of It All, and early days, still in a van, slugging it out, and we got a call. We were managed by this guy, Scott Koenig. He was, rest in peace. He was part of Rush Artist Management, who had Def Jam. So Scott Koenig managed us. He worked for Rush Artist Management, which was Russell Simmons and New York Cohen. And they had every rapper in New York and beyond. And so we got a chance to meet all these people. We had met the Onyx guys. I was working at a place in Queens previously at it was mostly a hip hop studio with Miss Melody, KRS-One, Eric Rodriguez, Boogie Down Productions, and I got to know a lot of these people. And so I was always into hip hop, but I was also a punk rock hardcore kid. The guys in Biohazard turned me on to metal. So that's my.
Yeah. It all.
So, yeah. So on this tour, the guys in Onyx reached out to Scott and asked if I would be interested in doing a remix for a song called Slam. So I flew home. We had 2 days off. I went in the studio, erased all their music, kept their vocals, and did a whole new track. They loved it. We did a video for it. And then through that video, I remember we played the Academy in New York in Times Square. And they showed up with vests, like bulletproof vests. And they're like, yo, you want a vest? They're like, yeah, your fucking crowd's crazy. No way. I'm not showing up here without a vest. I'm like, no way, dude. This is the hardcore scene.
That is hilarious.
We should also mention Ice-T with Slayer on Judgment Night existed, and that was right around the time Body Count became a band. So like there are things happening that I think went on to shape the rest of the 90s as we know it. But you brought up a good point, which is that like any style of music, later on they sort of get lost in terms of like the original sort of intent, which was, again, lots of social, political, lots of stuff about the streets, lots of things with messages. And later on, of course, you have things like Nookie, and that's not to take away from what they did, but like that really kind of is a big departure from singing about the types of things that I think Biohazard were singing about, or even Rage Against the Machine especially.
Yeah. If you want to look at a Rage Against the Machine song, like No Shelter, which I think is which is such an important song in an age of anti-immigration, and you look at that next to Nookie. Look, Nookie is hilarious. I'm not gonna dismiss bangers. I'm not saying it's a banger you should be proud to listen to, but it is a banger, and you can't deny that. So look, we've been talking about dudes pretty hard, and I know I have a problem in terms of the absolute messed up gender split of who I've spoken to over the course of my career. But there is some very amazing women out there who have been an absolute cornerstone of making punk rock and modern music what it is today. And I think the women of the Riot Grrrl movement, the Bratmobile, the Bikini Kill, the Team Drash, Slater Kinney, all these bands made such a huge impact. And Riot Grrrl was a big deal, like especially when I was really young. Like to see that happen was a big deal. So, and they started from Zines, and so I got we had Molly explain to us what a zine was and the origins of her band.
A fanzine is just the simplest document you could possibly have of, and it's just, something that you might want to replicate and hand out. And the topics vary. Like ours was called Girl Germs. It was focused on, women in music, making music, or, supporting music in various ways. And, but we were, also in a really sort of mutually inspired way. We had been, Toby Vale, who's the drummer from Bikini Kill, had a fanzine called Jigsaw, and Donna Dresch from Team Dresch had her own fanzine. And so all of these things were like kind of they were available to us, and we would like send $1 in the mail and get the fanzine back. And so a lot of it was personal. Yeah. Some, I know, like Erin's fanzine, Teenage Gang Debs, was much more like professionally designed. She was very informed by, she was already passionate about 60s mod architecture and pop culture. And so I think like they had more of like, there was a design system with fonts and, like a graphic approach. When you look at the communities that we come from, DC and Olympia, documentation of that moment was a lot of what those records, of that time really were. And so it's interesting to think about it in any other way. I mean, now 33, whatever it is,
crazy
years. Yeah.
It's you said in an interview that this was very much the sound of 1992, even though it came out in 93.
Yeah.
How would you describe? I'm actually on a whole 1993 thing this week with this show, so
Fantastic.
it's interesting to get different perspectives on it. What was the sound of 92?
Well, I mean, I think it was that urgency and, sort of as you put it, the energy of what we were, people who were young, excited by, our friends, what was happening, the moment, the political moment, the moment of music that was being, created. And I think, just trying to keep up, I mean, part of when I think about Bratmobile and, we always had a less serious approach than our sort of peers, making up songs that she had been writing lyrics and I was learning guitar and sort of and we were inspired by bands that either had just, a really minimalist sound, like Beat Happening and, so one instrument or two and a voice was really informing almost everything that we were kind of inspired by them. The whole effort, like what became known as Riot Grrrl was really just about like, there should be more of us here,
We should make friends. We should talk.
We should make friends and we should also be on stage.
Arms. We could link arms and we'll get kicked in the head.
Yeah. But, that there should just be if you were thinking about it in terms of like the actual numbers, it's probably, one out of, maybe 5 out of 100 are, women were on the stage.
This is cool. When I was in high school around this time in the early 90s, I met 3 girls that introduced me to Sleater-Kinney, Team Dresch, Bikini Kill, and they had a Riot Grrrl band called Horticulture with a WHORE, kind of like the word horticulture. And we played like a lot of women's rights festivals and things of that nature. And like I was exposed to them and played in their band. We did Bikini Kill covers. And I think right now in 2025, the way that we're seeing so many young women in bands like Mannequin Pussy and Scowl and Gouge Away and, just like I Echo Vandal, like there's just like a massive population of women in punk and hardcore, I think more today than we've ever seen. And it's because of those bands back in the day, that paved the way for that. And we should mention Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth. We
can't deny, as we've said, that this music, the impact of this music will reverberate for generations, and it has, like all the way down to Slomosa. So Ben from Slomosa talks to us about how it's not Black Sabbath, but it's the 90s and Caius and all of those bands that really shaped their sound today.
I think people now, young people now, will gravitate or are gravitating more towards rock music inspired by the 90s rock, which was a lot more fun and quirky and contained a lot more, I would say, different expressions and different styles into the music, like the grunge music and Pixies and Sonic Youth and all the stuff that came that kind of had its pinnacle during the 90s. I think all of that music, me personally, just because, back in the 70s you had Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and all those bands. You didn't have that many bands. So yeah, I think Black Sabbath is kind of the ones who invented the catchy kind of thing.
Thank you for joining us. I will leave you with some sound musical advice from Molly from Bratmobile and Buzz Osborne from Melvins.
If you have, an idea and a melody and a beat and recording equipment, you can do something.
Be more aggressive with what you're doing. It's only music. It's not ultimately, it's not making sure the power is on for the day in your house. It's art, and art is extra in your life. That's what it is. It's for when you get off work, for you to unwind while you're outside of making a living for yourself every day. You know, that's what art is for, whether it's movies or paintings or, you know, even it could be a rug in your house. It could be music. That's what I do. I try to provide people with something that they don't get in their normal life.
Yes, and check out all our episodes across streaming and on YouTube, where you can watch them as web series episodes. And if you haven't checked out these records, please do yourself a favor. These are revolutionary, life-changing records. Urban Discipline by Biohazard, Slip by Quicksand, the first Bratmobile, you know, Houdini and Stoner Witch by Melvins are all amazing records, and it's great for us to sit down and do these sort of track-by-track things that we get to do. It's a pleasure, and I hope that you learned something. We are learning something when we talk to these people, and that's what it's all about.
Fuck yeah, this is Rework Records. This is New Noise Magazine. Rock and or roll. May the dark forces be with you.